You're listening to the Alpha Wolf Podcast.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Alpha Wolf Podcast. This is your host, Wolf7. Today we're doing our introductory podcast. We're going to do things a little bit differently today. What we'll do in the future is I'll have guests on and I'll be asking them questions, and we'll try to create some shared understanding between the Arctic Wolves and the command group up here at Building 1555. Today, what we'll have is we'll have a guest asking me questions and introducing myself to the Arctic Wolves. So our first guest we're going to have today is Staff Sergeant Jacobson. Staff Sergeant Jacobson works up here at Building 1555 as the Ops NCO. We'll give Sergeant Jacobson a chance to introduce himself.
Hey, I'm up here with Sergeant Major Rose as the Operations NCO. I came out of 1-5 Infantry, and we're going to be doing this podcast. So, you ready, Sergeant Major?
Ready.
All right. What was your last duty station? Where did you come from?
My last duty station was in Vilsig, Germany. It was 2CR. I was the Squadron Sergeant Major of 1st Squadron, 2nd Cavalry Regiment.
All right. What are some of the different units that you've been in before you got to Germany?
So I will lay out all my units from beginning to current. So I started the Army in 1st Ranger Battalion in Savannah, Georgia. I spent my first 6 years in 1st Ranger Battalion. I went from PV2 to E5 there. From there, I left and became a recruiter in Palaca Recruiting Station just south of Jacksonville, Florida. I recruited for a little shy of 3 years, then PCS to Fort Lewis, Washington. Fort Lewis, Washington, I was a squad leader and a platoon sergeant in 5th Stryker Brigade 2nd ID. I deployed to Afghanistan in 2009 to 2010. After that deployment, I came back and moved to Fort Walton Beach, Florida, and became a Florida Phase Ranger instructor. I was a Ranger instructor for 2 years, was promoted to E8, and moved to Fort Carson, Colorado. I was in 1st Brigade 4th ID. I started out there when it was an HBCT, and about a year after I took over as a first sergeant, we switched to a Stryker Brigade there as well. So 1st Stryker Brigade 4th ID. After my first sergeant time there, I moved to Fort Polk, Louisiana, and I became an OCT, First Sergeant OCT in Task Force 3. Stayed in Fort Polk, Louisiana for about 18 months before I made the list to go to the Sergeant Major's Academy. Went to the Sergeant Major's Academy, and out of the Sergeant Major's Academy, I made the command list and was selected to serve as the Squadron Sergeant Major of 1st Squadron, 2nd Cavalry Regiment. Moved over there around November timeframe and stayed there for a year and a half before I made the CSL for the second time to come to 125. And so got here about around the end of August, drove in about the end of August, and then I, did my ROM, and around the middle of September, did my change of responsibility to become Wolf 7.
What do you say is your motivating factor that drove you to join the Army?
Well, I'll tell you, I was in college. I was an athlete in high school, and I had gotten a partial scholarship to go to college. I barely made the GPA to receive that scholarship. And so, school wasn't my strong suit. And so after about, the first semester of college, I realized it wasn't for me. I also wasn't as good a basketball player as I thought I was. So I decided to join the Army from college. And, I talked to the recruiter for a while, and I had known about Rangers when Ranger School was in the desert phase, was in Dugway, Utah at one point, and I was living in Dugway, Utah, which is a very small place, kind of out in the middle of nowhere in Utah. And so I knew a little bit about Rangers, and I wanted to become a Ranger. That was really my motivating factor for coming in the Army. And then after a while, being in Ranger Battalion for that first 6 years, I just decided that this was going to be something that I wanted to do for a career, or for as long as the Army would let me.
So you said that education wasn't your strong suit, but you've definitely turned that around. Have you got any education since?
Yeah, so when I was a first sergeant, when I was a OC in Fort Polk, Louisiana, I got looked at the first year to go to the Sergeant Major's Academy, and I didn't make it. I didn't know why, and the only thing that I realized that I didn't have was education. So I started going to school around 2016, and by 2019, by March 2019, I had gone through and I'd got an associate's right away before I went to the academy. While I was in the academy, I finished my bachelor's, and then about 6 months after I came out of the academy, I got a master's in science and management with concentration on human resources management. I don't know how important that is, but that's what it is.
So tell us a little bit about your family.
So I married my high school sweetheart. We went to the same high school. My dad was in the Air Force, so I moved around a lot. I ended my last 3 years of high school in a small town in Idaho, and she was going to school there. She has a twin sister, so we were in a class of 18. So out of 18, I met my wife, and we dated while we were in high school, and then I already talked about going to college. We went off to college. I joined the Army. She stuck around, and then about 2 years after I was in the Army, I came back home and was snowboarding and met up with her, and we decided to get married. Been married since 2000, so we're about to hit our 20-year anniversary here in December. So pretty happy about that. I've got 3 kids. I've got a 15-year-old boy named Noah. I got a 13-year-old girl named Savannah. I got a 9-year-old boy named Jacob. Those guys are my pride and joy, and I'm real happy and proud of them. They've gone through a lot, especially in the last 3 PCS moves, which each, were about 18 months. So they haven't been able to spend a lot of time getting grounded in a home life before I've had to pick them up the last 3 times and move them. So they've all been in the military their entire life. So I think we call Idaho home, but they've been all over the place, bouncing back and forth across the United States, and, these last 2 kind of all the way around the other side of the world.
Going from Germany to here, they must be pretty used to the cold already. You finding it a little bit more cold up here, or how's the experience with the Fort Wainwright winter so far?
So it hasn't been too cold yet, but as soon as we found out we were coming here, we all kind of did a high five and decided that we actually wanted to come to Alaska and put it high on my list. It was actually number 1 on my list to come to. And we all decided we wanted to come here. As soon as we found out we came here, we looked at the weather and we realized that it was 40 below. We found out in January, and we looked at the weather. It was 40 below, and we were sitting in Germany, and it was about 32 degrees, and we were freezing. So it was a little stressful. But, since we've got here, it hasn't gotten too cold. Of course, me and my wife are from Idaho, so we're kind of used to the cold and the snow, but we're looking forward to seeing what it's like to be in these sub-zero temperatures up here in Alaska.
You got any big plans while you're up here, snowboarding or getting out or anything like that?
Yeah, my wife, she used to work at a snowboarding hill, and so, like I said, the thing that, brought us together was actually snowboarding. So we're hoping that we get out here and snowboard. We haven't been able to do it together for quite a while. Our kids really haven't been old enough, and we've just recently gotten to the point where we think that we can go out and take our kids with us and do some snowboarding around here. Teach the kids how to do something that we really love.
So, what can the soldiers and the junior leaders in this brigade expect from you as the new sergeant major?
So what I hope that they can expect from me is, number one, I appreciate the hard work that all of our soldiers here do in 125. So I hope, I hope they will be able to feel my appreciation for the things that they do. What they can expect from me is hard standards. I'm going to push them to be excellent. Something that I really hope everybody, comes to think is that excellence should be the expectation. And so while I'm out there, I'm going to expect excellence. And if we're not accomplishing excellence, then what I think you'll find from me is I'm not the type of guy that's going to dig into you for not meeting a standard. I'm the type of guy that realizes that there could be a reason that you're not meeting the standard, and that's because you don't know how to. And so what I hope everybody finds from me is when I show up, I'm showing up to try to teach people how to meet the standard, or teach people how to meet an expectation of excellence. I also think they can expect me to be approachable. I don't know if my demeanor is necessarily approachable. I'll tell you, I absolutely don't have a problem with anybody coming up and talking to me and, telling me how you think things are, the way you think things should be. I expect hard questions from everybody. And I hope when you ask the hard question, you keep an open mind and realize that I'm going to give you an honest answer. And sometimes that honest answer might not be the thing that you really want to hear, but that's what I want to provide people.
A lot of sergeant majors and first sergeants, as most junior leaders and the lower enlisted know, have their one thing. What would you say is your one thing?
Oh, Sergeant Jacobson knows what my one thing is, and that's why he's asking me. So I think there are indicators that you can find inside an organization to really suss out what the character of the organization is. And the first thing that I noticed as I was driving around Fort Wainwright was the way everybody parked their vehicles. And so we have we have a habit around here. It looks like, I don't know 100%, but it looks like we have a habit of just parking wherever it seems convenient. And what I think my thing is going to be is trying to get guys to park in a parking spot. And I know that's going to be hard. I know snow's on the ground. You can't always see the lines, but you definitely can see a parking lot. And what I would appreciate is if leaders and soldiers took a little bit of consideration into that. And that way I don't have to run around here and yell at people for how they're parking.
So what are some big training things that you want to mainly focus on between Wolf 6 and yourself?
So I guess I can explain that by, talking through Wolf 6's, I don't know what he really calls it. Priorities, maybe? I don't know if it's his priorities, but something that he always says is he wants this organization to be Stryker-Arctic-Pack. And so I think based on that, there are a whole bunch of implied tasks that come with all of those things. And so what I think that we're initially going to focus on is, reforming as a Stryker Brigade. And what that means is we need to train like a Stryker Brigade. And if you know what the advantages of a Stryker Brigade are, it all, it wraps around the infantry squad. The infantry squad's the thing that comes out of the back of the Stryker. But the bottom line is that Stryker needs to get that infantry squad where it's going. And so being a Stryker Brigade means that we can move by Stryker to the places that we need to move dismount and become a lethal infantry organization when we come off the back of those Strykers. So when we talk about training focuses in the future, it all wraps around the squad being that 9-man infantry squad as well as that 2-man crew that work inside that Stryker. I think as the non-commissioned officer of the organization, it's my duty to concentrate mostly on the individual and team level skills. And so when I say that, I think when we talk about training, I'm thinking about marksmanship training. I'm thinking about medical training. I'm thinking about physical training. And then, moving up a step, we're talking about some small unit tactics. So, I think inside of an infantry squad, the most important drill you can do is squad attack. And so, that's easy for me to say for the infantry squad, being an infantry soldier for my entire career. But I would ask the other MOSs that we have in our organization to take a look at what they do and look at what their squad attack would be inside their organization, and really look at the individual skills and the team level skills that build to that squad attack, whatever it is for your MOS. And then if we can get really good at that squad attack, I think we're going to be ahead of the game and moving in the right direction.
So I got to read a little piece from you and about you in a magazine not too long ago. And it was about that you were on the cutting edge of the new tactics over there in 2CR in Germany. Are you excited on trying to implement those? Are you planning on implementing those while you're here? Oh.
So, we in 2CR, what Sergeant Jacobson is talking about, in 2CR, we fielded the 30 millimeter Stryker and the what we call the ICBJ or Javelin on the RWS. And based off of those two weapon systems, our organization tried to figure out how to use those best in the theater that we were in. We developed some tactics, techniques, and procedures that worked for the 30 millimeter. I think some of that could work in this organization. It would have to be talked about and adjusted just because we don't have the 30 millimeter here. But I think some of the tactics are still the same. I mean, a lot of it was put together based on, old mechanized type tactics. So, defile drills, stuff like that, and figuring out how to take our advantages, capitalize on them, look at the enemy's advantages and try to decrease those. And I think those principles, as well as some other principles that you learn, we did a lot of defense in depth, and when you talk about doing a defense, there's the steps of engagement area development. And so we looked at the steps of engagement area development, and a lot of times you have higher units that do that, and we really sat down and looked to see if we could push those steps of engagement area development even lower and have a squad leader be able to develop an engagement area based off that. And so we really put a lot of pressure on our squad leaders to do a lot of stuff. I mean, they had these firepower upgrades, and the expectation was huge on our squad leaders. And so I think that's a good principle that we could bring forward here and just make sure that we're doing everything that we can to develop our squad leaders in the best way that we possibly can.
So before the Army or while in the Army, in your life, who do you think has been your biggest influence?
Yeah, so I knew you were going to ask this question, and I thought about it a lot, and I couldn't nail it down to one person. So what I'd like to do is talk about these groups of people who have influenced my life as I've gone through my military career. So first and foremost, I had, all the NCOs that were surrounding me when I was in 1st Ranger Battalion. And, my time in 1st Ranger Battalion was really a great base for the rest of my career. And, I spent from E1 to E5 there and, really learned how to fight at the team level in 1st Ranger Battalion, and every NCO that I interacted with there influenced me in some way, shape, or form. The ones that shaped me the most were my squad leader, who is now Sergeant Major Caprati in 425, and the other team leader that I worked with, and he's now a CSM in 1st Ranger Battalion. His name's James Spencer. So those guys influenced me in the beginning of my career and really helped me develop me up to, that small unit level. So the next group of guys that really influenced me were a couple non-commissioned officers when I went to 5th Stryker Brigade 2nd ID. And, most importantly, there were 3 NCOs there. One was my first sergeant. His name was Kevin Floyd. One was my platoon sergeant. His name's Charles Burrow. And then one was a platoon sergeant, and then eventually became my first sergeant. We actually moved down to Florida, became RIs together, and his name's Rob Carter. And so I would say those three gentlemen, they taught me a lot about becoming a platoon and company grade leader. And they really set me down, kind of pulled me aside from my peers and taught me things that, I don't know if they were teaching everybody, but I think of all of those guys as mentors to me. And, I stay in contact with Rob Carter and Charles Burrow, and I appreciate their feedback. And I think those guys, every single one of us became CSM. So Rob Carter, Charles Burrow, and Kevin Floyd, they were all CSMs. One's teaching in the Sergeant Major's Academy right now. I think the other 2 are retired, but I reach back to Sergeant Major Burrow and ask him questions every now and then, and he always gives me solid advice. So the last group of people that I would say influenced me were the command group that I worked with in 2CR. And that was Lieutenant Colonel Timothy Wright and Major Jake Phillips. And working with those 2 and, sitting down and talking and, running the command of that squadron with those guys was an incredible experience for me. And, Lieutenant Colonel Wright was just an absolute genius, and he knew what he was doing. He knew what he was talking about. And, as soon as we got together, we clicked immediately and really did a lot to improve that squadron, I think. But the guy who really, really changed me for the better is that executive officer, Jake Phillips. And what he would be able to do is, I would walk into his office, he would walk into my office, and we would sit down and we would talk about issues and talk about problems that needed to be solved. And, he would hit me with advice, and he would say, hey, I think if we're going to get better at this, you should try this. And every time he said that, I would do it. And then, on the back end of me doing that, the people who would see me taking his advice would think I was a genius. And so I was really, I was taking advantage of working with some really great people. And so, all of those guys who influenced me, I would say, when you think about Sergeant Major Rose is not a person who, got in the books by myself and learned all of the things that I know, or, came up with the leadership attributes that I do. I believe that I'm a compilation of all of those different groups of non-commissioned officers that taught me along the way. And, I would say I'm probably the biggest example of plagiarism that you probably know, because everything that I say and everything that I do, I've learned from somebody else. So all of those guys that I just mentioned, I really respect every single one of them and appreciate what they've done for me in my career.
So what are your big takeaways and your views on professional development of your leaders?
So leader professional development is, something that I think a lot of people talk about it. A lot of people say the word, and, people would talk to me about leader professional development, and they would say your LPD plan is not your PowerPoint presentation. And when I first heard that, I didn't understand what they were talking about. And it took me a while to actually sit down and understand what they meant. And what they really meant was, for instance, I pull the first sergeants in once a month. I pull the CSM once a month, and we, sit down and we talk about leader development issues or talking points. And that's just one element of the leader professional development that I take part in. So I view every single interaction that I have with subordinates as a possible point of leader professional development. And so, we'll come into a meeting, and when we come into a meeting, people will be briefing about what the environment's like, or people will be briefing about, these are our stats for personnel stuff, or whatever it is. So the command and staffs and the training meetings, and inside of those, I always think, at the end of it, because Wolf 6 always gives me the last word, which is awesome, and I really appreciate it. A little awkward for me because I'm not used to being the last one to speak, but he always gives me the last word, and I think, that's a leader development opportunity. So as we go through the briefing, I'm constantly thinking, how can I, with this, one touch point, develop leaders to improve our organization. And so that's a second aspect of leader professional development. Then, we put on our schedule recon all the time. And what I think about when we go on recon is what am I going to do out there to develop leaders while I'm out there? And that's, my a third aspect of leader professional development. And then, what am I asking people to do? And am I asking people to do something just to get a task done, or can I ask them to do certain things to develop them as leaders? And so, there's putting all of those things together. That is your leader development plan.
So today has been a little bit of a different podcast. How do you foresee the future of the podcast?
What I see the future of this podcast looking like is me and the group here with the producer figuring out, based on input from all of the Arctic Wolves and 125, figuring out topics that are important to everybody out there, and they want to hear my opinion about it, and then me inviting a guest on who has subject matter expert in whatever the subject is, and then sitting down, having a discussion with them, asking them questions, talking about my point of view of those things, and answering questions from all the Arctic Wolves online. Like I said before, I expect some tough questions, and I want to field the tough questions, because what the purpose of having this podcast is trying to be more transparent than maybe we could be without the podcast. So I want everybody to know what I'm thinking about. I want everybody to know what Wolf 6 is thinking about, and that way we can create this shared understanding. So I see us, sitting down and having a conversation back and forth, me asking questions of a subject matter expert, and then me answering questions from guys that they post online, wherever that's going to be. Thank you for listening to Alpha Wolf Podcast. This program is supported by listeners like you.